listen to my show, I know way too much about this job that I do, and it's important to me to know the history of it, and I got to witness some of it, and I've gotten to meet a lot of my heroes. And so far, only two have been assholes, and it's not the two up here. This is going to be fun. This is Steve Earle. You listen to the Steve Earle Show, Hardcore Troubadour Radio and Outlaw Country. How are you? We're out here on Outlaw. Benson, and that's because of two bands that they were in and everything they've done since then, and it just has to do with the moment that I kind of became me, because I happened to be in Texas at a certain point in time and got to witness a couple things. And we're talking about Commander CODY and his Lost Planet Airmen, and the Sleep at the Wheel. And these two bands were joined together from the beginning, and it's a moment in American musical history, and I just a chance to, I'm just beside myself that I'm going to get to interrogate these guys about it. Now I will say that what qualifies me to do this is I did see Commander CODY and Asleep at the Wheel on the same bill at least 3 times, and I know twice. I think it's twice at the Armadillo. And did I hallucinate this? Is it possible I saw CODY, Asleep, and Greasy Wheels on the same bill? Is that possible? I think it very does. Yeah. There was this thing going on in Texas that it started in a lot of places. Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is the beginnings of Commander CODY. I used to run into guys from Detroit later on, all the guys in Mid's private band, they used to refer to what they were Ann Arbor bands. That was anything that wasn't just straight ahead based on R&B, rock and roll, as far as they were concerned. So,
because Iggy was an Ann Arbor band.
Exactly. So it's not, this whole idea of looking back at musical history, the roots of rock and roll, and people that, that I was getting the shit beat out of me by people that listen to country music, but I couldn't stop being interested in it. So bands like the Johnny Cash Show being on television, that was a big deal. Because seeing Bob Dylan and Neil Young on the Johnny Cash Show, and Willie Nelson moved back to Texas, and all of a sudden I'm standing in a cow pasture listening to the same bands with guys that used to kick my ass. And so you guys, Willie Nelson, that scene, I think, is part of the reason that I've managed to survive the end of high school and the transition into adulthood. So a couple of things is the connection between, and I'm not sure about it, but there's a connection between Berkeley, California, and Austin, Texas. And it's a lot of things. It's a cultural connection. For one thing, Owsley went to Austin, too. that's some of it does have to do with LSD. And Underground Comics.
And the Family Dog.
The Family Dog, exactly.
Gilbert Shelton and all the guys.
Yeah. And so let's start with Ray. How does Asleep at the Wheel get from, how the fuck did you get to Pawpaw, West Virginia, and how does Pawpaw, West Virginia get to tell us that story, because that hooks us back into CODY and
yeah, I went to Antioch College for a few months. And Ed Ward booked Commander CODY to play a show. He also booked Hall with Jesse Edwin Davis and everything. So we're seeing great music, and CODY comes into Ohio there, and they played the show, and it was just fabulous. It was amazing. And they needed a place to stay, and I had an apartment, and so they said, okay. And so I went and stayed in the dorm with some girl, and they crashed at my house, and we had a jam. And I was 18, and Bill and Billy C. and all the guys, we just jammed, and I went, I'm going to start a band. And I went to move to West Virginia. Okay, how did I move to West Virginia? Just we met a couple of hippies that his dad had a 1,500-acre farm they were caretaking. He said, hey, you want to start a band? Come on out. So we did. Bill actually drove up to the farm. He's the only civilian that ever came to our farm in West Virginia. And so we started playing honky tonks around there, and then the Hog Farm. No, we didn't start playing anywhere. We were nowhere. We were trying to get a band together, and all of a sudden, the Hog Farm was driving through West Virginia, and they said, well, there's a bunch of hippies up there with a band. Oh, okay, so they came there.
Hog Farm, for those of you that don't know, and it's just like this is showing all of our ages, and I'm the kid among this group. Hog Farm, very, very famous, probably the oldest commune of that era, and the center of it was Wavy Gravy, the former King Romney, and they're the people that fed breakfast in bed to 400,000 at Woodstock.
And they were traveling, it was called the Medicine Ball Caravan. With Tom Donahue, the great FM DJ from the Bay Area, put together this thing. They were traveling around the country in buses playing concerts, which is it was the end of the 60s. Right. So they came to our little farm. It was me, Leroy, and Lucky. We didn't even have a band. We were trying. And they said, hey, you want to come down to D.C. and open for the show for Hot Tuna and Stone Ground? That was wow. Man, and so we said, well, yeah, we called up a bass player, went down. And the guys at the Hog Farm, I was sitting on my gear and I pulled my back out. And the guy said, here, take this. Here's a handful of peyotes, which I took.
I'm none back here.
Yeah, my back was fine. And we played the show, and all of a sudden we were a band in D.C. And I called up Joe Curry, their manager, and I said, I got a band. It's called Sleep at the Wheel. We were doing pretty good in D.C. And they came and we played shows, and then they invited us out to Berkeley for a few weeks.
As we did.
Yes, CODY invited us out, Joe and those guys, and we were supposed to stay for a few weeks, stayed 3 years.
You know, you guys moved into the Louise and I was here living in a chicken coop, and we moved into the big house, and you moved into the chicken coop.
True story.
We were the ones who went to West Virginia and Louise's Kaiser and ate the deer that you guys killed with a pickup truck and a hammer.
It was a mercy killing.
It was country.
It was a mercy killing. We came upon this deer. Did some guy had hit in his car, and we didn't have a gun or knife or anything, but we had a hammer. If I had a hammer, we just also hoping never anymore. Yeah, never indeed.
There were all the vegans in the audience.
But we did, we survived on, we also had two friends who liked to kill animals, and they kept us alive. They had guns, and so they would shoot deer, and we would butcher them, and actually tan the hides. And it was all very organic and very, very simple.
So, I wasn't like that when I got there. A big piece of deer on the kitchen table.
It's for a better show, but we reminded to tell you about Townsend's and the wrecking that we ran over the weather. That's all. So the CODY origin story, just because we lost George. You know,
we did.
And so if you want to set all that up in the beginnings of Commander CODY and who Commander CODY was.
Sure, I'll try to make it short, but I was a town hippie. I'd gone to also a few months of college in University of Michigan. I'd taken a year off after high school, so in '66, I had a psychedelic hippie band called the Seventh Seal, and the CODY guys were frat men. And John Tishy, anyway, they had frat bands, the Fantastic Surfing Beavers, the Amblers, and I was a town hippie, and I had this psychedelic band, and they saw me play the Ann Arbor Film Festival, and they were putting together, at this time, it was, pot had just become, I hadn't just hit town, but it became the order of the day, and they were putting together a band with dancing girls. We had the fabulous Twist Queens, and people doing this and that, showing. We played once a show at a dental school, and we showed dental extractions on the. You can see we had a finely tuned commercial bent already. We were going in for the kill. But anyway, so they invited me to join that band. We had a great hillbilly from Alabama, Billy C. Farlow. We had a blues band that played in town, and he knew all the Hank Williams songs and stuff. And so that was the start, and that was really my introduction to country music. I was a folk nerd at the time. I was a huge Dylan fan. I'd hitchhike in Newport in '64 and '5, and saw him go electric in '65, etc. So it wasn't too hard to. And but seeing Doug Kershaw first on the Johnny Cash show, and then seeing. And we were already doing the Diggy Diggy Love and stuff. So That was my introduction to country music and to rockabilly, to all things 50s, which I have missed.
Right.
And it's so hard to imagine now. We were mining songs that were only 10 years old.
I know.
Nowadays, 10 years doesn't get you shit.
Yeah,
It was yesterday.
and see, for me, it was interesting because I'm 67, so I was born in 1955, which is essentially when rock and roll was born, and I backtracked to a lot of things because of that. I backtracked from Beatles records and Creedence Clearwater Revival records to the Sun Elvis recordings. I knew Elvis beginning with, with the RCA stuff. So, and
Well, I actually heard the Sun stuff first because I got there later than you did.
Right. So so I had to backtrack to a lot of things, and folk music, even my dad wouldn't let me have an electric guitar, so I just kind of gravitated towards more acoustic stuff. There's 5 kids, and not quite enough money, and he didn't want to hear the racket, so I had an acoustic guitar. So I started hanging out, and I was also so young when I started playing. I played coffee houses.
Yeah.
Which are another part of that culture. So I started hearing about Towns Van Zandt, and I started hearing of Jerry Jeff Walker. I knew about Jerry Jeff long before he moved to Texas. I played Mr. Bojangles in a play in high school, and so I was always just, the youngest of a group of people. All my contemporaries were 5 years older than me, and that's how I learned how to do this. So all of a sudden, there's all these bands that converge on Austin. So how does it all end up in Austin and the Armadillo World Headquarters?
Well, Eddie Wilson was the incredible promoter. He ran the Armadillo.
Opened in 70 to 80. That's exactly the run of Armadillo World Headquarters, which I think is really interesting.
And 1970. We both closed it the last show.
Yeah, the very last show at Armadillo World Headquarters was Commander CODY and Asleep at the Wheel.
And with Maria Muldaur, Kenneth Recchio, and Ramon and Fort Eddie. But CODY had a huge hit. I mean, Hot Rod Lincoln was a top 10 record in 1971. And all of a sudden, the records we had. So all of a sudden, the record companies were, get me another band with a stupid name that plays weird old music.
Sold.
It really was so strange because they had no idea what we were doing. They really didn't. They just knew that they just scored the big hit. And so, CODY, I remember you all played opening for Alice Cooper. We did the same thing. We would open for.
That's a good thing to remember. Back then, there was no genre distinctions. We would play with Frank Zappa, with Alice Cooper, with straight ass country bands.
I saw Greasy Wheels, who we talked about earlier, who were really, the hippiest country band you could imagine, but they were really good. It was a really, really, really cool thing. And but I saw them in a band called Cracker Jack, which was in Austin at the time, which was a straight ahead kind of like an English style blues rock band, and they were really Tommy Shannon was the bass player of that band. Unc was on drums, just the same guys that were Johnny Winter's rhythm section just before that, and later on Stevie Ray Vaughan. So you saw any kind of music in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, we all just played music together, and there was not this compartmentalization of music. And also, the Wheel figured it out. We went, oh, okay, well, if we cut our hair and wear country western clothes, we can play the straight country joints.
Right.
Because old Doug Simon, let me just say, Doug Simon was the other reason why I also. Doug was one of the reasons that that he just.
My original hometown rock and roll hero. I met Doug Simon the first time when I was 14 years old. Wow. Doug moved back from the West Coast, and at first he thought he was going to be able to live in San Antonio again. So they moved in, and they put their kids in the high school I had just dropped out of, but I was still hanging out there in the afternoon because that's where all the girls I knew were. And I followed Doug's daughter home after school and stood in the driveway until he came out and talked to her. That's how I met Doug Simon.
Yeah, he really created the scene, and Doug, and by the way, for those who don't know, Steve Earle is actually Doug's illegitimate brother. So definitely a genetic connection. But it was incredible because Doug was the guy who would play T-Bone Walker next to Charlie Pride, next to.
Well, he had played with Hank Williams, and he had played with Mouth Brown at the Eastwood Country Club. He came by both of those songs.
He played steel guitar, little Doug song.
And fiddle.
He was active in 6 generations of music. He started in the 40s as a child prodigy steel player, and he died, almost made it to 7 generations. He lasted to the very end of 1999.
The most undersung of the Texas blues guitar players was Doug's song.
And so we all had this mixture down there, and then of course, you know, there were places to play. The Armadillo was the big place, but then Soap Creek Saloon was the cool place, and then the Greasy Wheels was basically a house band there. And Paul Ray and the Cobras, and Stevie Vaughan was the rhythm guitar player in the band. And, it was quite a scene.
And Frida and the Fire Dogs.
Marshall Balls originally band, Frida and the Fire Dogs was country rock, country band.
They were you know, that's a weird thing. They were the hardest country of all the hippie country bands, because they did Stand By Your Man and smoked it. It was just an airplane piano.
And she did when she owned the Cowboys, I Want to Be a Cowboy Sweetheart. They were an incredible band. And then Marcia decided to become a great R&B piano player, singer. But everything was there. There was rock bands. There was a Cracker Jack, sure, remember that. Stevie Vaughan.
She just had them.
She was Jimmy Vaughan and the Thunderbirds were just getting going.
Well, you know, the missing piece to this story, I think, is that while you guys were doing that, before you guys were doing that in Austin, California had that very same mix of acts. Never to the extent, I don't think, that the Armadillo did, but it was rock and roll and rhythm and blues, and you came to California first in order to establish yourself.
Yeah, 71.
And then headed out and, you know, stayed in the chicken coop.
Stayed in the chicken
like you're supposed to.
And CODY was there.
But so
clean chicken coop.
So and none of us ended up at that point in Nashville. We went to Nashville putting out records from California on the Dot label.
Right.
We were doing rock and roll on Paramount, and we were doing country music on Dot. Well, our third album we recorded an actual Texas song called Everybody's Doing It Now.
Right.
And
you had the word there. Everybody's trucking in.
Can we say that?
Yeah, you can say that. You can say
Fucking hands. But anyway, so
That's a good thing. You gotta truck it in, fuck it.
anyway, just to wrap up that story. Let me finish the story. Wild Animals. Anyway, so we put out the album. It's got Truckin' and Fuckin' is one of the songs. And there's a sticker on it that says, Side 2, got 3, not suitable for airplay. Well, that song was the gospel song. Somebody in the record company even had a cool and lovely sense of humor. It was just a mistake, or as we would say, a fuck up. So Truckin' and Fuckin', everybody's doing it now, went unprotected. And we got a letter. My wife was in the audience, Louise, who was at Outlaw with us, and Louise remembers the letter from Jim Fulton that started, "Gentlemen, we have a problem." And at this point, we were virtually run out of Nashville. And there was no long hair. We were the only long hairs in Nashville. And we were the only people who admitted to smoking dope. And
Right.
So that was, it was an interesting time. And right after that,
Yeah, we came out. Yeah, well, it was a tough
everybody came out. Everybody, Will and Willie, all of a sudden doing. Admitting to what they'd always been doing.
It's an interesting thing because I witnessed it from both sides. Because I moved to Nashville in 1974, and a lot of it was just me knowing myself that weather too good, girls too pretty, Dub's too cheap. I'll never get anything done here, and it was too close to home, so I went to Nashville. And that moment, Willie had moved back, but Waylon was still there. And
they'd already been run out of town.
They were, he dug his heels in, and they were over there at Tom Paul's place, and you could walk into JJ's Market, and they were in there playing pinball in the middle of the night if they were on the road, and it was pretty damn democratic. You could end up in the same room with, I'd be in the same with me, David Olney, other people that were just at ground level, could end up in the same room, and this is just a moment. It didn't last very long. With Guy Clark and Dave Loggins, I think the first night I went out there and I met Neil Young, Jerry Jeff Walker needed a designated driver because he was not allowed to drive in Tennessee anymore. And he said, come on, we're going to stop here, we're going to go by McGuire's, blah, 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 blah. So then we're going to go see Neil up at the Spence Manor, and Neil turned out to be Neil Young. And,
Well, that's my experience there was the same with the musicians. Everybody was cool and it was exciting, but at that point the dollars were ruling. And
Well,
that was the only beef anybody had with us. Was
the window opened for a second in Nashville, and then before I got a chance to get a record deal with Plus. So it was, I was there at Guitar Town. I got to Nashville in November of 1974. Guitar Town came out in March of 1986.
Yeah.
There you go.
I do have to mention that one of the things that CODY and Steve both did was, and CODY did it first, was to play the Nashville DJs convention.
Wow.
Which was this was the big deal. All the DJs would come to Nashville and have a big thing, and CODY was on Paramount Records.
71. We did the one 71. Yeah.
And we had got a job backing up Stoney Edwards. We were Stoney Edwards and Freddie Hart's band, and so we got it, but we didn't have a hotel or anything, and they got a hotel because they were with Paramount Records, and we played the show. We were backing up people, and we all played the show, and the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band also played the United Artists show. That was the next year, sorry. But it was revolutionary because this was exactly that turning point where Commander CODY came in, because the Burrito Brothers and all this, they avoided Nashville because they got so dissed on, remember the Ralph?
Drugstore truck driving man.
And so we actually infiltrated the dang place, CODY first, and all of a sudden Nashville went, oh, there's hit people doing this. Maybe we're hit because at that time, they were trying to be what they call country pop. They were saying, if we make these records sound just enough like everybody else's record, they might buy them. And so
First thing they went were banjos, and then they were working on cymbals, and then all of a sudden the only steel players were working were really good players, but the one guy I knew, and I won't even say his name because he was a good guy and a good player, but he was the last guy working because he was the first one to get a Mutron, a distortion device where he could make his steel sound like strings. Because they were just trying to take those things that were automatically identified as country music.
Yeah, like Poco. Poco was another great country rock band.
Right. They're one of the best. There's a different thing, though. I think a distinction between, there were kind of two schools of country rock, and I got a pretty fucking good country rock band at this point in its history, but there was the California thing, there was a lot of it, guys that were folkies, and it was based more on bluegrass because there was a very strong bluegrass thing out there. Chris Hillman, he knew that stuff, chapter and verse, and he didn't learn that from Graham Parsons. The two of them, that was a million miles. But there was that stuff, and then there was other stuff, like you guys, it was based more on jump blues, western swing and stuff, and that kind of makes it a little bit more of a first cousin to rock and roll in a lot of ways. So.
I have a question though.
Sure.
Why is Ray Benson holding a guitar?
Yeah, so, because you guys are supposed to sing something, but it's really
Good talk.
The reason why I hold this guitar is you can get girls.
That train has sailed, Ray. I'm sorry.
I say used to. I can do this half of Steve, I told this to Steve because this song was written by a lady, Bob Johnston, a legendary producer, produced with Johnny Cash, Bob Dylan, who else? Everybody? Who did Bob Johnston produce?
well, in the history of this music, he produced Geronimo's Cadillac, which is kind of the beginning of a lot of the country rock thing in Austin. So.
Anyway, he was a legendary guy, and he passed away a few years ago. His mom wrote this song back in the early 50s. I saw miles and miles